All air forces have been criticised for not entering a certain aircraft at a certain time. Aerial warfare was still developing. Added to that, the 1945 requirements were different to the ones of 1939. Pacific and CBI theatres were different to the desert and Europe. England and the US believed at the start of the war that bombers could reach the target and protect themselves. The Germans showed the British that that idea was wrong, and Bomber Command in part moved to night missions. The US wanted to see for themselves. This was not a wholly new idea for the Germans. They had experienced this situation during the Battle of Britain. Shorter ranged, high altitude missions was more expected. Deep penetration bomber escorting was not part of the main requirements. US AAF missions began in 1942 and saw problematic damage and losses until autumn 1943, which was the disastrous Shrine Fort ball bearing raid, which saw 60 bombers lost and many more damaged with wounded and casualties. It could no longer be argued that unescorted bombers were a sound strategy. This doesn't mean the Germans were well prepared either. The war for them had expected to be short, and well, it wasn't. Pilot training and replacements were an issue. Also, the Germans had trained around blitzkrieg, of being on the offensive for a short, hard duration. The Luftwaffe had now fought in North Africa, the European theatre of operations, and the dreaded East. They did not expect raids of the scale, the depth, or the type that happened. The Luftwaffe bombers were mostly medium with a tactical idea. The US AAF were heavies with a strategic ideal. The Bf-109 was an amazing fighter, but it struggled against the B-24s and B-17s. The FW-190s was a much more well-suited aircraft for bomber interception. It has sometimes been said that the bombing offensive was pointless. This is not true. If nothing else, it tied up experienced flyers, some aces, and much needed equipment that could not be moved to other fronts. The Allies now had a large problem. The Spitfire and P-47 both were amazing but did not have the range. That left the P-38 Lightning, an incredible fighter in its own right, but not really a match for the 109 or Focke-Wulf 190s. Missions would only be able to be conducted within the range of escort fighters. Deep raids would no longer be possible unless a long-range solution could be found. But the Germans also needed to examine tactics. Blitzkrieg, fighter offense and cover missions were very different to high-altitude bomber interception. While it was clear that unescorted daylight missions were too costly for the Allies, that did not mean it was not dangerous for the attacking fighters. Box formations had a lot of guns firing on enemy fighters. Although the P-51 changed everything, long-range escort missions were dangerous and the Mustang's fuel management caused its own problems. The centerline fuel tank, as it was used up, could make the fighter unbalanced in combat maneuvers, so bad that a non-recoverable spin could happen. This led to some to use it first before enemy action. This could lead to the drop tanks being discarded while still having a decent amount of fuel in them. Being over Germany was not the place to lose fuel with a long flight back. The juggling of the P-51's fuel system took some planning. The P-51 was in some ways a flying fuel tank. Even with escorts, determined fighter opposition and flak could still take a toll. On a raid in early 1944, nearly 170 B-17s were escorted by 40 fighters, but they would still lose 29 B-17s. The Mustang did fundamentally change the Allied air war, but the Germans would make kills until the surrender. The B-17 and B-24 crews flew incredibly dangerous missions that tied up a great deal of German forces. These were needed in the east, as well as causing considerable damage on the war industry.